Hi, this is Dr. Perry Carpenter. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to join me on this week's video. In this week's video, we're in session number 2 of our new series entitled Update on the QME Regulations. And what we're discussing in this series are the new proposed changes. They're not yet active and final changes. These are new proposed changes that the Division of Workers' Compensation is proposing in an effort to improve the qualified medical evaluator process as we know it to be. And I want you to know that I consider that to be a good thing. If you've ever taken the time to review the QME regulations, you realize that the QME regulations have a noble purpose. And the purpose of the QME regulations is to improve us as qualified medical evaluators and to improve the system as a whole. And the new proposed changes that the Division of Workers' Compensation has submitted and is now passing rapidly through the rulemaking process, these new changes have just that as their intended purpose, and that is to help further push the system along towards the better end of the spectrum. So I've reviewed the new proposed changes to the QME regulations, and I want you to know I consider them to be all good changes. And in today's session, I want to share with you more about how the new proposed changes to the QME regulations can serve you in your practice as a qualified medical evaluator and how you can benefit from knowing these changes, from adopting these changes, and from mastering these changes, and by implementing these changes into your day-to-day operations as a qualified medical evaluator. And I have some fascinating ideas for you today along those very lines. Now, before we get into today's discussion, let's just review where we've come from so far and what we talked about in session 1 of this program. We're talking in this program about the select few changes of all the changes that the DWC is proposing to make to the QME regulations. All of those, I've hand selected out a few of the select changes that are going to dramatically impact your day-to-day operations, and those that will have the most immediate impact upon you as a qualified medical evaluator. So we did an introductory session in our first session, and we talked about several of these new codes of regulation, including CCR 31.3, which has to deal with scheduling appointments with you as a qualified medical evaluator. We touched upon some evaluation and reporting guidelines in 35.53. We spent a little bit of time talking about the Division of Workers' Compensation's new direction that they're taking in implementing new training for both want-to-be prospective qualified medical evaluators and also existing qualified medical evaluators, both groups of which are going to be required to complete anti-bias training. Now, doctors who want to become qualified medical evaluators will be required to complete anti-bias training before being able to sit for the QME examination. And then existing qualified medical evaluators, such as you and I, are going to be required to complete at least 2 hours of anti-bias training every 2 years as a condition of reappointment of your QME credential. And we talked about the several new codes of regulation that deal with bias in the workers' compensation system, and this is something where we're going to devote an entire session to in the next discussion, or perhaps the one after that. It's very, very important. We talked about some changes to the process whereby we as qualified medical evaluators can submit our QME reports on the parties, and we're now going to be allowed, if these changes do get adopted into law, we're now going to be allowed to service the parties electronically, and this has the potential to be a great time, effort, and resource saver for us as qualified medical evaluators. So I consider this to be a good change because it helps to boost the profitability of our reports by eliminating all the cumbersome and costly procedures involved with paper and snail mail service of our reports on the parties. So gone is going to be all of that cumbersome and burdensome and time-consuming and resource-consuming process involved with serving the parties paper copies of our reports. So I'm very, very excited about this new proposed change. And then we spent some time talking about some of the pitfalls that qualified medical evaluators can unknowingly get themselves into, which, if discovered by the Division of Workers' Compensation, can result in a denial of your reappointment as a qualified medical evaluator, several of which, not just one, but several of which have to deal with qualified medical evaluators' misconduct and disrespectful handling of their examinee during the face-to-face evaluation. So we're going to spend some time more on this in a future discussion as well. But suffice to say that the take-home message from that discussion in our last session had to deal with your courteous, respectful, and professional conduct during the face-to-face evaluation, and specifically that your examinee not pick up any attitude or tone of bias or discrimination from you. And this is something that we're going to spend quite a bit of time on in the future, because this is an apparent problem in the system, and the Division of Workers' Compensation has recognized bias and discrimination in the system as a problem, and as a result they've set about some new measures in the form of new codes of regulation and in the form of new changes to the QME regulations to combat this pernicious and pervasive problem among qualified medical evaluators. So we'll spend more time on this in an upcoming discussion. Now, in today's session, I want to talk to you in more detail about CCR 31.3 and scheduling of appointments with you as a qualified medical evaluator. And this is going to be important for you to understand, because when your phone rings for a qualified medical evaluation appointment, you may think that that appointment comes at the end of a series of events that have led to you being chosen either by an unrepresented injured worker or you being left the last man standing after a strike process, and the scheduling of the appointment with you is the last step in a process. Well, I'm here to tell you that the scheduling of the appointment with you is nowhere near the last step in a process. In fact, many times it's at the beginning of a process, it's in the middle of the process, and the process itself does not always end in a solid, high-quality, compensable, reimbursable appointment. Many times, the appointment that's scheduled with you is not compensable, and you don't even know it at the time that you're scheduling it. And I get these calls from qualified medical evaluators all the time complaining that they're not getting paid for these evaluations that they've done. And the reason is they've gone ahead and scheduled, in their excitement, they've gone ahead and scheduled what turned out to be a low-quality appointment that was actually not a reimbursable, solid appointment from the get-go. So I want to help you avoid those pitfalls and show you how to schedule only high-quality, compensable, reimbursable appointments for which you can reasonably expect to be paid very, very quickly after the submission of your report. So I'm excited to share this with you, and this is going to help you tremendously as you move forward, because it will help you increase the profitability of your QME practice by eliminating those weak, low quality, poor quality appointments wherein you just spin your wheels for absolutely no reimbursement. Okay? So with that as our introduction, let's begin today's discussion, which is our continuation on the update of the QME regulation. Okay, so let's begin today's discussion about scheduling of appointments. And in this session, I want to show you how the new QME, the new proposed changes to the QME regulations can help you increase the profitability of your QME practice by scheduling only appointments in your QME practice that are high quality, compensable, reimbursable appointments. Now, what is the opposite of a high quality, compensable, reimbursable appointment. What is the opposite of that? The opposite of that is a low quality appointment for which you run the risk of being not reimbursed, or run the risk of not being reimbursed for your appointment. And let me just share with you a story. So many of you who know me know that I'm a chiropractor, and I realized many years ago in my chiropractic practice that not all scheduled appointments were the same. Some appointments that were scheduled were higher quality appointments than other appointments. So let me just give you an example. Imagine if you're in a clinical practice, such as a chiropractic practice, a physical therapy practice, medical practice, what have you. It's all the same. And you have a patient for whom your average charge per visit is $50. And I'm making this up. I'm just illustrating using round numbers for the purposes of establishing this point. Your average fee per service is $50. But this patient shows up only every 2 out of every 3 scheduled appointments. They're not consistent, solid, every scheduled appointment is a good appointment patient. You're only getting 2 kept appointments for every 3 scheduled appointments, okay? So in actuality, you're only getting $100, that's for the 2 kept appointments, out of a potential of $150 for 3 scheduled appointments. You're only getting 2/3 of your rate. So if you take your $100 and you divide that across 3 scheduled appointment visits, you realize very quickly that you're not getting $50 per visit from this particular patient. You're getting only $33.30 from this particular patient, compared to other patients who keep every single one of their appointments, for whom you collect $50 per patient. On this particular patient, you're only getting 2/3 of your rate. Well, I realized many years ago that I could not create and develop a profitable chiropractic practice by having patients not keep scheduled appointments. Well, the same thing goes for your QME practice. For your QME practice, especially now under the new medical legal fee schedule, where we get a fixed and flat rate fee reimbursement for each of these appointments, now there's no buffer built into the system. Now in your QME practice, you cannot afford to schedule appointments that are low quality appointments that have the potential of being canceled, of being rescheduled, that have the potential of you going forward with the evaluation for which you're not going to be reimbursed in the end. Can you see how this would drive down the profitability and your per evaluation average for your evaluations over time? This would drive down your average. By scheduling low quality appointments, it drives down your average, where in the converse, scheduling only high quality appointments drives up your per evaluation average. So let me establish a little foundation for you by going over some of the laws that govern the scheduling of appointments with us, beginning with CCR 31.3. So this is part of the new changes to the QME regulations. This tells us, 31.3 tells us that if a party with the legal right to schedule an appointment with a QME is unable to obtain an appointment with a selected QME within 60 days of the date of the appointment request, that party may waive the right to a replacement panel in order to accept an appointment no more than 90 days after the date of the party's initial request for an appointment request. Okay, so what does this code of regulation tells us? It tells us that we as qualified medical evaluators need to be available within 60 days. If you're not available within 60 days, then the party who's requesting an appointment with you has a decision to make. They have a decision to either get a replacement panel, which the law allows them to do, or they can decide to waive the right to a replacement panel and stick with you if you can schedule the appointment within 90 daes. If you can't schedule it in 60, they can decide to stick with you if you can schedule it within 90. So in my opinion, my philosophy is, and what I suggest to all of you, is that you be available within 60 days and remove the opportunity for any decision by the parties to opt out of using you as a qualified medical evaluator. Okay? You need to be available within 60 days. So when you get those phone calls, when are you scheduling your next appointment, tell the parties that you're scheduling within 60 days. That renders you as available. It makes you, quote unquote, available for the evaluation. If you're not available within 60 days, the party can declare you to be unavailable and can order a replacement panel. In which case, what's the purpose of you being on the panel in the first place? The purpose of being on the panel in the first place is to hopefully capture an appointment. So if you're going to be on the panel, you should certainly be available for any party who calls you. So always be available within 60 days. Now, the code goes on to tell us that when the selected QME is unable to schedule the evaluation within 90 days of the date of that party's initial request for an appointment request, either party may report the unavailability of the QME, and the medical director shall issue a replacement panel pursuant to 31.5. 31.5 is the code of regulations that deals with replacement panels. Unless both parties agree in writing to waive the 90-day time limit for scheduling the initial or even a subsequent evaluation, such as a reevaluation, a second face-to-face evaluation. So here is where you run into troubles and run the risk of losing appointments by being not available, first of all, within 60 days, and then certainly by not being available within 90 days. If the parties elect to use you after 90 days, it's only because they really, for whatever reason, they really want you, but it requires an agreement by both parties in writing to waive the 90-day time limit. So in my opinion, you should always make yourself available within 60 days and certainly no longer than 90 days. So when you get a call for an appointment request and the parties are asking you, when is your next available appointment? There's two possible correct answers to that question. The first correct answer is that you have appointments within 60 days, thereby complying with CCR 31.3E. The second answer is you can say that you or the doctor is scheduling appointments between 30 and 90 days, 30 and 90 days. And can you see that 30 to 90 days includes the 60-day timeline? So that may be a good way for you to kill two birds with the same stone, is to be available between 30 and 90 days. But certainly you should always be available within 60 days of the date of the appointment request. Okay? So once you declare yourself as available, let's go through the process whereby the parties, in the case of a represented injured worker, whereby the parties would stumble upon you potentially I say, as the last man or woman standing on the panel. Okay? So let's talk here about the strike process and how this affects the profitable scheduling of appointments for you as a qualified medical evaluator. Okay, so the first step in scheduling high quality appointments is in first making yourself available. So always look at your schedule into the future and make sure that you can accommodate an appointment within 60 days. Now you can tell the parties that you're available between 30 and 90 days. But sometimes the parties take it a step further and they try to pin you down. And in other words, they don't accept that generalized time frame and they try to pin you down to an exact date, and they'll say something like, well, when is the doctor's first available appointment? and make sure that your response to that question is always within 60 days. That eliminates the decision-making process that the parties would have to go through to retain you as the qualified medical evaluator. You know, in sports like boxing, there's a saying, and that is, don't let it go to the judges. Don't let it go to the judges. Boxers try and score a win, such as a knockout, early in the fight so that it doesn't have to go to the decision-making subjective process out of the control of the boxer by passing that decision on to the judges. Don't allow the parties to have to go through a decision-making process to accept you as the qualified medical evaluator, and you do that by making yourself available within 60 days. Okay? So imagine this, you're now available, you're available within 60 days for scheduling. Let's take a look at the process that goes on behind the scenes with the parties that ends up with a phone call coming to your office for an actual request for a QME appointment. Now notice that I said when the phone rings, what you're receiving when you answer the phone is you're receiving a request for an appointment. Now, a request for an appointment is not the same as an appointment. A request for an appointment has to be passed through several filters, before which what drops out of the filter is a high-quality compensable evaluation for you. But it begins with a request for an appointment. So let's see what goes on behind the scenes and what you can do to drive that request towards the profitability side of all appointments. So this is from Labor Code 4062.2c now, not the codes of regulation in the QME regulations. This is from the Labor Code, but it tells us what the striking process entails when your name comes up on a panel. So it tells us that within 10 days of assignment of the panel by the administrative director, okay, key time frame here, 10 days. 10 days. So you'll most likely be receiving your request for a QME appointment at least 10 days after the date of issuance of the panel. The date of issuance of the panel is on the panel, and you can do this research yourself to confirm this to be true. Within 10 days, each party may strike one name from the panel. So that's 2 strikes from the panel. The panel contains 3 doctors' names. Well, the doctor who remains unstruck, the so-called last man standing, the remaining qualified medical evaluator, shall serve as the medical evaluator. Okay? That's very clear cut. In cases where both parties strike a name from the panel, the last man standing is the last man standing, and that's an objective finding. However, not all strike procedures are so clear cut. And that's what we're getting into here in the latter section of this code. It tells us if a party fails to exercise the right to strike a name from the panel within 10 days of the assignment of the panel, okay? So here's where subjectivity opens up. One party can accuse the other party of not responding within 10 days. Can you see the myriad and multiple ways in which that could happen, where one party accuses the other of not striking timely within 10 days, not striking timely? Okay, well, if one party does not strike timely, what happens? It tells us the other party may select any physician who remains on the panel to serve as the medical evaluator. Okay, so I'm telling you that you're getting these calls all the time. These calls that contain some subjectivity, that could contain some dispute as to whether or not one or the other party had the opportunity or even exercised the opportunity to strike. Okay, now this top section of the code, this is where you want to get your appointment requests from the top section of this code, wherein each party has the opportunity to strike. Each party does their strike, and it's very clear with no dispute that one doctor is the remaining doctor, the last man standing doctor, who gets the job. Those are the types of cases that qualify as high quality cases. As we go down this labor code, the quality of your appointment diminishes and even disintegrates, okay? So let's read this again. If a party fails to exercise the right to strike a name, and you're going to get these calls all the time when you ask, say for example, you get a call from an applicant attorney and you say, am I the last man standing? And the applicant attorney's office says, well, we exercised our strike, but the other party failed to strike within 10 days, and so we get to choose. And that's what the code says. It says the other party may select any physician who remains on the panel. So the applicant attorney is saying here that the other party didn't strike, so we're exercising our right to choose you as the qualified medical evaluator. And the applicant attorney office is very, very happy because they're able to take control under this code in selecting who they consider to be the most favorable physician on the panel. But don't you know, this raises the opportunity for dispute, okay? Whereas the top section of this code, there is no dispute. The bottom section of this code has tremendous opportunity for dispute. What is the dispute? What if the other party, say for example the defense attorney, says, we never got a copy of the panel. We didn't know the panel was ever issued. We never were presented with an opportunity to strike. We're objecting to the specialty of the panel, and 1,000 different forms of dispute can arise in this litigious, litigation-based relationship between the parties, wherein you are the centerpiece, you are the pawn that the parties are attempting to maneuver around in an effort to control the other party and in order to dictate the direction of the case. You become the piece and the pawn used by the parties. So I'm going to show you how to handle this when you get evaluations or requests for appointments that are not from the top part of this code, the profitable section of this code at the top, that come rather from the lower profitability section of the lower section of this code. Okay, so let's talk about how to handle this particular situation. Okay, so now can you see that just by knowing these last two laws, CCR 31.3 and then Labor Code 4062.2, can you see that behind the scenes, the parties are going through a series of steps and procedures in an effort to weigh their options when they receive a panel. They're weighing their options. So can you imagine, first of all, that you get a call where one of the parties is asking, are you available? When is your next available appointment? Can you imagine that they could possibly call you with this question prior to exercising their strike from the panel? Can you believe that that takes place? Can you imagine such a scenario where, imagine the applicant attorney calls and determines that you're unavailable. In other words, you're unable to schedule within 60 days. And they declare that you're, or they conclude that you're unavailable. And then they make a couple of other calls and find varying availability of the other doctors that are on the panel. Can you see how this creates the opportunity possibly for a replacement panel? So for example, the party determines that you're available. They could then strike you from the panel because you're available, knowing full well that the other two doctors on the panel are unavailable, which would then result in a replacement panel being issued. And that's just one example as to the many games that go on behind the scenes between the parties, each of whom is trying to gain control over the other party through the QME panel process. Well, so that you don't get caught up in scheduling low quality appointments, let's go through a procedure that you can employ now that you know about these laws and these codes of regulation, that you can employ in helping ensure that when you schedule the appointment, it is actually a high quality, compensable, and reimbursable appointment for you. The first step to doing that is when you get a call and the parties indicate that they want to schedule an appointment with you, always ask for the following items. Number one, you're going to ask that they send you a copy of QME Form 106. Now, we've talked about this in other discussions, but QME Form 106 contains valuable information for you that will help you expedite the preparation not only of the appointment itself, the administrative preparation of the appointment, but also it'll help you expedite the preparation of your evaluation, meaning your face-to-face evaluation and your report writing process on the evaluation. It will tremendously help you expedite and streamline those sequences of events. Next, you're going to ask for a copy of the panel and a copy of the demographics. Now, I want you to know that the parties consider these pieces of data to be routine. They will never be surprised when you ask for a copy of the panel and a copy of the demographics, because they're used to sending those pieces of information over for an appointment request. QME Form 106 may come as a bit of a surprise to the parties, but I'm suggesting to you that you insist that they send you a copy of this form. They have this in their file. This is a form that they've used to request the QME panel upon which your name appears. They can easily retrieve this form and they can easily provide that to you. Now, when you get a copy of the panel and a copy of the demographics, make sure that your name is on the panel. And this probably sounds like a no-brainer, but I just had a case the other day where the party sent me a copy of the panel and the demographics, and don't you know, the panel did not have my name on the panel. So I'm a chiropractor, and the panel that they sent me was a medical doctor orthopedic panel. So here's where the quality of the appointment started to disintegrate. My staff had to then send another email back to the party and to inform the party that the panel that you sent us does not have Dr. Carpenter's name on the panel. Can you please provide us the proper panel? Okay, and I'll come back to that in just a minute. Make sure that the examinee's name on the panel is the same as the examinee on the demographics. Now, you're going to think I'm making this up, but not only did the party send me a panel that did not have my name on it, when she then sent me the correct panel that did have my name on it, the injured worker's name on the panel was not the same as the injured worker's name on the demographics that she sent me initially. So probably what was happening is this legal secretary was scheduling QME appointments all morning at her particular law firm, and she sent me the wrong information regarding the wrong examinee. So we had to get back in contact with her and let her know, thank you very much for sending us the proper panel, but the injured worker's name on the panel is not the same as the demographics, so can you please provide the proper demographics? So notice that this required 2 additional cycles of action on the part of my staff, simply in order to obtain accurate information to schedule the appointment. Step 1, schedule. I'm not even talking about doing the face-to-face or the report yet. We're just trying to get over the hurdle of scheduling the appointment, and these 2 extra cycles of action required by my staff drives down the profitability of this appointment. Okay? Well, fortunately, we were able to get the panel and the demographics matched up. The next thing we asked for was copies of the strike letters that left me unequivocally and undisputedly as the last man standing. Now, this is critical, and I want you to pay very close attention as to the necessity of the strike letters. When you're able to obtain strike letters, that confirms that you are the last man standing and that there will be no objection to the appointment. When you get copies of strike letters, you're scheduling appointments at the top of Labor Code 4062.2c, wherein we talked about in our last graphic, where both parties have struck and there's no dispute that you are the last man standing. When you are the last man standing without dispute, you retain and sustain the profitability of your appointment. Now, once you get copies of strike letters, you can then check your schedule to determine your availability. If you use a satellite office, you're going to go through the scheduling sequence, and I'm going to go through this with you just to make a point. You're going to contact your satellite office and confirm the availability of the satellite office. You're then going to go through the process of completing what you're required to do, the appointment notification form, okay? And you're able to complete the appointment notification form because your demographics that you obtained here and here are all complete, at least to the extent that they allow you to fill out the appointment notification form, right? If you're missing information that goes on the appointment notification form, that's information that you're responsible for, and you cannot fill out the appointment notification form until you have complete data. Then you can notify all the parties, meaning the claims examiner, the applicant attorney, the defense attorney, through either 3 faxes or 3 emails of the appointment day, date, and time. Then you can go through the process of sending the letter to the examinee with any intake documents or questionnaires that you want to send to the examinee, all of which requires postage, which requires hard copies of papers, envelopes, stamps, all of which cost money in hard costs and then also in soft staff costs. And when you get strike letters with no dispute with you as the last man standing, all of these scheduling procedures can be completed in one cycle of action. And that's your goal, is to complete every single process in the evaluation in one cycle of action. And that goes not just for the scheduling of the appointment, but also for the other procedures from start to finish in your evaluation, including collection procedures. If you can collect your billing in one cycle of action, you retain the profitability of your evaluation. Okay? So the flow chart would look something like this. If you imagine, all appointments come in to the top of the funnel here. All requests for appointments come into the top of the funnel here. You take those appointment requests and you send them down through a series of filters in the funnel in the hopes that what drops out of the bottom is a high quality report. And the filters in the funnel include QME Form 106, include a copy of the panel with the strike letters, and include a copy of complete demographics. If you're able to obtain all of this information the first time through when the appointment comes to you as a requested appointment, if you're able to obtain all of these pieces of data, it's very, very likely that what you're looking at is a high quality, compensable, and profitable appointment. Okay? It's more likely that the appointment request with you is legitimate. And it's not simply one or the other parties attempting to determine their options and attempting to jump the gun on the other party through the lower section of Labor Code 4062.2c, wherein one or the other parties can engage in gaming and attempting to gain an advantage over the other party. So always ask for these pieces of data. Now, let's see what happens if any or all or some or any combination of these pieces of data are missing from your request for a QME appointment. Okay, so when you can get all the necessary pieces of data up front when the initial request for an appointment comes in, you can ensure that the appointment will be a solid, compensable, high-quality appointment. Now, if any or all, any one or more or all of those pieces of information are missing, then the quality and the profitability of the appointment begins to diminish. So again, the pieces of information that you want to request are QME Form 106, a copy of the panel with strike letters, and a copy of complete demographics with no information missing, at least to the extent of the information that you need in order to fill out the appointment notification form. Now, if any one or more of these pieces are missing, instead of a high quality appointment, you're going to end up with a lower quality and therefore a more expensive and a less profitable appointment. Okay? So, like we were talking about at the beginning of today's discussion, when you have a clinical patient in your clinical practice that attends only 2 out of every 3 appointments with you, not only are you receiving a fraction of the compensation that you could, would, or should receive, the costs for administering the treatment to that particular patient begins to escalate. In other words, the cost to deliver service, the overhead cost for that patient increases. So those are not the benchmarks upon which you want to build a profitable practice. What we want are patients who attend their appointments who are easy to administer. Okay? Well, when these pieces of information are missing or are absent from the appointment request, the profitability of your evaluation suffers and it becomes more expensive to administer the evaluation. So let's take a look. Imagine that you're unable to obtain QME Form 106. Now you have no idea which labor code is driving the need for the evaluation, and therefore you cannot prepare properly for the evaluation. You're at the whim, you're at the mercy of the parties to let you know something as the evaluation approaches, either through their cover letters or through their correspondence with you. If you can get QME Form 106 in advance, you'll know exactly which labor code is driving the evaluation, and therefore you'll know exactly what to do. If you don't get QME Form 106, you'll have no demographic data except that which is sent to you by the parties, many times of which is erroneous, is incomplete, has the wrong claims adjuster's name, does not have contact information. In other words, QME Form 106 serves as a valuable second piece of demographic data which has passed through already the filter down at the DWC. So this is a very valuable and critical form that you make sure that the parties send to you. Let's say you don't get a copy of the panel. Now you cannot fill out the appointment notification form because you don't know the QME panel number. You can't confirm the location of the evaluation. You don't have any demographic data, and this requires you to either get back on the horn or send an email, or in other words, expend more administrative time on just scheduling of the appointment, thereby increasing your cost for scheduling the appointment, thereby decreasing your profitability of the evaluation in its totality. Again, like what happened to my staff in the example that I shared with you in the last graphic, we were not able to confirm that the examinee's name on the panel is the same as the examinee on the demographics. We cannot determine the date of injury or the date of panel issued, and can't determine whether or not the strike process is taking place in a timely fashion, all of which serves to escalate the cost of this evaluation, thereby diminishing the profitability of the evaluation. Okay? So those are missing pieces of data that raise a red flag for you as to the quality of the appointment. Okay? Well, what about the strike letters? Any one or more of these missing pieces of information contribute to a low quality, expensive, and unprofitable appointment. Now, probably the greatest challenge that you're going to face in dealing with the parties who want an appointment with you is in obtaining the strike letters, or I should say failing to be able to obtain strike letters. And this is really where the rubber meets the road in terms of the quality of the appointment and the confidence with which you can go ahead and schedule the appointment, knowing that the appointment is going to keep, that the appointment is going to transpire in one cycle of action, and you're going to be reimbursed in full and obtain the maximum profitability allowed for under the new medical legal fee schedule. Without the strike letters, you cannot confirm that you're the last man standing, and therefore that there will be no objection to the appointment. Therefore, if you can't do that, there exists the possibility of some objection to moving forward with the evaluation with you. Okay? So imagine that the parties tell you something like, we made our strike, but the other party didn't strike, so we're choosing you. And you go ahead and you go through the scheduling process that we talked about in the last graphic, and you schedule the appointment. Well, if it turns out that the appointment has to be rescheduled, if it turns out that the appointment becomes canceled, if it turns out that the other party has some objection to the specialty on the panel, all of the time that you spent to check your schedule to determine your availability is wasted time. All of the time that you spent to contact the satellite office to confirm their availability is wasted time. The time you spent to complete the appointment notification form is wasted time. The time you spent to notify all the parties of the appointment in the 3 faxes that you sent out, or the 3 emails that you sent out, and all the materials that you prepared in order to notify the parties, all of that time, all of that effort, all of that energy, all of those resources is wasted. The time you spent to send a letter with the intake documents to the examinee and then it comes back in the mail because you didn't have the correct address of the examinee, the apartment that the examinee was listed at in the demographics turned out to be not true. All of the postage that you spent, all of the hard copy materials that you spent, all the staff time that was spent is wasted time and wasted money. And all of the time spent on the above activities is wasted time, and even more valuable than wasted time is the lost opportunity that you could capture in the same amount of time had you devoted that time to something more profitable, either in your clinical practice, in your QME practice, or even in your personal pursuit. All of that represents lost opportunity as you have to go through this in a second, third, maybe 4th cycle of action, all of which contributes to driving your evaluation costs up and driving the profitability of your appointment down. So in order to drive this point home, let me share with you some of the common scenarios that we encounter in these scheduling of these low quality and unprofitable appointments. Okay, so let's go through some what ifs. And I go through this exercise with qualified medical evaluators all the time who complain to me that they're not getting reimbursed for evaluations that they've properly conducted. Can you imagine going through an entire evaluation process and not getting reimbursed? Well, the reason is because they've scheduled a low quality appointment in the beginning. So let's go through a couple of scenarios. Let's say you ask the parties for copies of QME Form 106, copies of the panel letters with strike letters, copy of the complete demographics. When you obtain all of that information, you're left with a high quality, profitable appointment. But if any one or more of those pieces of information are missing, it should raise a red flag for you that you're dealing with a potential problem evaluation that's going to become low quality, expensive, and an unprofitable appointment for you. So let's say that you decide, even in the absence of one or more of these pieces of information, to go ahead and schedule the appointment. Well, what if, because of some objection initially, let's say the parties say that, well, we have an objection to the panel. We have an objection to the panel. Okay, so imagine this. You get a request for an appointment. You go through the whole scheduling process of the appointment. You notify all the parties of the appointment. And then one of the parties, typically the defense attorney, will write you back and say, we have an objection to the panel, the specialty on the panel. Okay? So all of the time, all of the administration that you've spent on this evaluation is wasted. But let's say, for example, the appointment then gets rescheduled. Like, for example, the parties go to a hearing on the specialty of the panel. The medical director approves the panel upon your wish, and the parties decide, okay, they're going to go ahead and schedule with you anyway. And the appointment has to be rescheduled. 2 cycles of action. Well, if the appointment actually keeps, that equals double your administrative costs, which lowers the profitability of the evaluation. And you still don't know the labor code, you still don't have accurate demographic information, you still don't have all the information that you could, should, or would have gotten up front had the parties provided you all of that information. Now, even worse than that, what if because of some objection initially, in other words, you scheduled a low quality appointment, perhaps due to an objection to the panel. Maybe there was an objection to the specialty of the panel, and for that reason you weren't able to get the strike letters, and the appointment does not keep, even though you scheduled it. All of that time is a complete loss. At least if the appointment keeps up in this scenario, your cost is doubled. Your admin cost is doubled. And that doubling of costs is going to come out of the reimbursement for the appointment, which lowers the profitability of the appointment. But in this scenario, if the appointment does not keep, then there's a complete loss because there is no evaluation from which to extract the administrative costs of the appointment. Okay? Okay, so doctors, I hope this helps you. You know, when your phone rings for an appointment, the parties are exercising their options under CCR 31.3 and under Labor Code 4062.2C. Well, it's important that you not be caught up as a pawn in between the parties, each of which is trying to leverage and trying to gain an advantage over the other parties. So all of these laws, all of these labor codes, all of these codes of regulation, just like the new medical legal fee schedule, have built-in incentives for each of the parties. For you as the qualified medical evaluator, your incentive is to ensure that when you schedule an appointment, in other words, when you dedicate the time, effort, energy, and resources, either in your own time or in your staff's time, that appointment be a high quality, profitable, compensable, and reimbursable appointment. This is how you build a career as a qualified medical evaluator, and this is the same way that you would build a career in your clinical practice as well, and that is by weeding out the unprofitable and expensive patients that simply drag the practice down. Well, the same can be said for low quality appointments in your QME practice. So high quality appointments are appointments for which you're able to successfully gain all of the earmarks, landmarks, and measures of a quality appointment. A quality appointment is an appointment that contains or carries with it QME Form 106. It carries with it two, count them, 2 strike letters, one from each of the parties that unequivocally, undisputedly leave you as the last man standing. It's an appointment that contains a copy of the panel, contains a copy of the complete demographics that allows you to quickly and accurately fill out QME, the QME appointment notification form, such that the demographics are accurate, such that when you send notifications to all the parties, including the examinee, those things don't come back to you marked return to sender from the post office, okay? On the other hand, a low quality appointment should raise a red flag to you when you're unable to obtain QME Form 106. You're unable to obtain the strike letters. You're unable to obtain the panel. You're unable to obtain complete demographics. And of all these, my opinion, this is the determinant, the sole determinant, the singular determinant, the most important determinant as to the quality of your appointment. If you're unable to obtain the strike letters, even though you are able to get a panel, you are able to get demographics, and maybe you are able to get QME Form 106, but you're not able to get copies of the strike letters, it's a red flag. It's a red flag, and you could be scheduling an appointment for which you'll either not get paid or the profitability of the appointment will diminish because the cost of administering the appointment is going to very, very quickly escalate. So doctors, I hope this helps you. You know, the new proposed changes to the QME regulations have built-in incentives for all parties, and all parties, like any good sports team, uses the rules to their advantage. And I want to share, and I've shared with you in today's discussion, how you can use the language in CCR 31.3 for scheduling appointments, and also how to use the language of Labor Code 4062.2c to understand how you can most profitably respond when your phone rings for a request for a QME appointment. So that concludes today's session. In our next session, I'm going to continue with discussion of the evaluation and reporting guidelines and the new proposed changes in the updated QME regulations. So for today, this is Dr. Perry Carpenter. I'm wishing you best of success in your career as a qualified medical evaluator.